Wealth is a good that can't make us happy. Seriously? How can wealth be a good and not make us happy? I'll give two answers, one personal and one philosophical or theological. Welcome to Thinking Wisely with Dr. Isley, where we learn to live wisely by thinking wisely. First, the personal. While writing my novel, Chasing the Wind, I was looking for a quotation in favor of riches to introduce the section on my character Bart, who sought fulfillment through wealth. All the brainy quotes were negative. It was so wise to look down on wealth. That supposedly wise despising of wealth seemed not only false but hypocritical. It certainly did not reflect my own experience. I come from what I suppose would be called an upper middle class family. We weren't oozing wealth or dough, but we had a nice house, food on the table, and clothes on our backs, much more than just the basic necessities. I was able to afford college and grad school. All of this, at least in part, because we had the money for it. So, yes, wealth is a good, and I'm glad to have had it, but it can't make us happy. Here's where philosophy and theology come in. If we're going to answer the question concerning wealth and happiness, we need to define carefully what is meant by happiness, by wealth, and by human nature and how they relate to each other. Perhaps no other author has done that better for us than the 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas. In fact, it was Thomas's discussion of wealth that helped Bart, the character in Chasing the Wind, see that he could not find happiness through wealth. Thomas's discussion of wealth and happiness can be found in the Summa Theologiae, or Sum of Theology. It is often just called the Summa, maybe because it's hard to pronounce. More specifically, we need to look at his treatise on the last end because he defines those key terms so well and their significance for the question. My quotations throughout this video are taken from the translation done by the fathers of the English Dominican province. The treatise on the last end is found in the first part of the second part of the Summa. In this treatise, he deals with several questions. For our purposes, only the first two questions need to be examined. We'll start with his first question of man's last end. First, what is meant by the last end? Don't be confused by the term. In our more common language, we would probably use final goal. In other words, the last end or the final goal is the object that we are seeking to attain. As such, that last end is what leads us to act in the first place and directs our subsequent actions to reach that goal. For example, you want to become physically fit. That is your final goal. The goal of being physically fit motivates you to take on a course of action. That course of action would include diet and exercise. The diet and exercise are not the final goal of physical fitness, but are actions that are meant as means to the end of physical fitness. Well, what is man's last end or ultimate goal, according to Thomas? It is happiness, and happiness is the acquisition of the last end. This sounds like we're going around in circles, but it's not. To be happy means to have attained or obtained one's ultimate goal in life. But there is a problem that remains according to Thomas. All agree that they want happiness. However, all men are not agreed as to their last end. Why? Because some desire riches as their consummate good, some pleasure, something else for others. So, in what does man's happiness consist? This is the second question the very orderly and reasonable Thomas Aquinas asked in his treatise on the last end. In answering it, he considers 8 possible answers to the question. Wealth is the very first one. And Thomas's answer is blunt. It is impossible for man's happiness to consist in wealth. To make his case, he distinguishes between natural and artificial wealth. Natural wealth refers to food, drink, clothing, shelter, etc., and serves as a remedy for his natural wants. Natural wealth is thus a support to human nature. Or we could just say that natural wealth supplies us with what we need to live. By artificial wealth, Thomas means money, understood as a means created by humans to support the exchange of goods. With money, we purchase the items of natural wealth by which we can support human nature, items such as food and clothing. Money then is a means to the end of supporting human nature. Clearly, then, money is not our final end. I'll give an example. In my last video, Why Should You Read Silas Marner? I explained the novel's powerful depiction of Marner's suffering as a miser. He had become so perverted in his desires that he felt artificial wealth was an end in itself. He limited his intake of food and other necessities as much as possible so that he could collect more and more gold coins. It was only when he saw that the gold should serve another purpose that he was freed from a miserable and self destructive lifestyle. The link for that video is in the description below. Marner's desire for more and more gold points to another problem with identifying having money with happiness. Thomas writes concerning temporal goods, when we possess them, we despise them and seek others. The reason for this is that we realize more their insufficiency when we possess them. For example, we think that we'll be happy if we have a car. When one car doesn't satisfy, we buy another, maybe a more expensive or fancy one. The same could be said with clothes, houses, and technology. Happiness satisfies. Ultimately, wealth doesn't. So, neither artificial nor natural wealth can be man's final end, since they are merely means to that end, which is what Thomas concludes. Therefore, it is impossible for happiness, which is the last end of man, to consist in wealth. Before delving into additional reasons for rejecting wealth as man's final good or happiness, I must make one thing crystal clear. Thomas considers wealth a good. It is not an evil in and of itself. It is a good and is to be valued, but valued properly. It is just not our final good. Having said that, let's explain what else Thomas writes on the subject. He goes on to reject as man's final end or happiness other external goods, such as honor, fame, and power. This wholesale rejection of these goods as the final end of human life adds four additional reasons why wealth does not bring happiness. These reasons are found in Article 4 of Question 2. Here they are. First, since happiness is man's supreme good, it is incompatible with an evil. The problem here is that evil men have wealth and use it for evil purposes. So, our happiness does not consist in wealth. Second, it is the nature of happiness to satisfy of itself. And having gained happiness, man cannot lack any needful good. However, one can have wealth and still lack some good, such as bodily health. You can be rich and dying from cancer, for example. Therefore, our happiness does not consist in wealth. Third, since happiness is the perfect good, no evil can accrue to anyone therefrom. The trouble is that wealth can harm the wealthy person. Lottery winners spend recklessly and end up in financial ruin. Wealth can increase anxiety because of the desire to protect one's assets or cause one to isolate oneself from others because we don't think that we need them or we don't trust them. So our happiness does not consist in wealth. Fourth and finally, wealth, like the other external goods, are goods of chance or fortune. They can be lost once had or never attained at all. So our happiness does not consist in wealth. As a supplement to Thomas's first and third critiques based upon the evil that can be connected with wealth, my essay on avarice or greed, traditionally one of the seven deadly sins, might be helpful. I've included the link to that essay in the description below. In what then does human happiness consist? A very strong statement by Thomas reveals where his answer to this question is going. All material things obey money, so far as the multitude of fools is concerned, who know no other than material goods which can be obtained for money. He mentioned temporal goods before, and now the problem of thinking that there are only material goods. The reason is that the question of human happiness cannot be answered without reference to fundamental worldview questions. In this case, what is human nature? In the prologue to his treatise on the last end, Thomas begins with the affirmation that man is the image of God. Happiness depends upon the nature of the thing being considered. Since man is by nature the image of God, his happiness is directly relevant to his relationship with God. Thomas says that man's nature as the image of God implies an intelligent being endowed with free will and self movement. Man's intelligence and his free will then must relate to his happiness in God, which is just how he concludes question 1 of the treatise. For man and other rational creatures attain to their last end by knowing and loving God. That is, through their reason and will directed to God, they find their fulfillment or happiness. Now, I could have started with this declaration, but I wanted to demonstrate the reasoning of Thomas before I stated his foundational principle. I did this so that those who would reject his arguments as soon as they heard that they were based upon belief in God might first feel their force. However, Thomas's beginning with a clear declaration of his view of God and human nature serves as a reminder that questions such as human happiness can't be profitably discussed without considering foundational philosophical and theological views. What do you think? Does our happiness consist in the acquisition of wealth? Do you agree with Thomas that our final end is to know and love God? Let me know in the comments. Also, my book, Chasing the Wind, a philosophical novel, recounts the lives of three men who pursue fulfillment by means of wealth, knowledge, and pleasure. If you're interested in exploring these issues for your life, I've included the link to Amazon for the purchase of Chasing the Wind. Thank you for listening.